welcome, Cabinet Secretary. It's very nice to see you again here. We will go straight to the questions because of time. Question number 57, Senator Professor Tom Ojienda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shall ask question number 057, addressed to the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, Madam Soipan Tuya. The question is in 4 parts. Part 1, could the Cabinet Secretary elaborate on the climate change initiatives put in place both nationally and in each county, considering the diverse topography and unique environmental and climate change needs of each county? B, what expertise was engaged and what criteria was applied in developing the national climate change initiatives and tailoring them to the specific needs of each county? Thirdly, could the Cabinet Secretary explain the measures put in place to enhance the capacity of each county government to implement the climate change initiatives in their respective counties, including the technical expertise of county governments to address environmental and climate change concerns, as well as the allocation of budgetary resources to each county within the designated timelines for the initiatives? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, sir, could the Cabinet Secretary provide progress reports on the implementation of the climate change initiatives in each county? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cabinet Secretary, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this invitation and for the questions raised by the Honorable Senator for Kisumu County. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, on matters climate change, environment, there is a very intricate link between the functions of the national government and those of county governments, and the role of the Senate becomes very crucial in terms of oversighting the implementation of climate action. Mr. Speaker, in terms of background, climate change remains a major threat to our nation's economic, social, and environmental well-being. And the major challenge remains to be how we will overcome the current low levels of climate resilience and the adaptive capacity that continue to threaten the ability of our local communities and key sectors of the economy to withstand the climate shocks that we find ourselves in. The ministry is the government lead on all issues climate change and has, through the Climate Change Act of 2016, established the requisite governance structures to guide climate change action in the country. And I will be expounding on this a little later. Mr. Speaker, Kenya is signatory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and the Paris Agreement. And we have been very keen to adhere to this important multilateral process by tapping into the available opportunities for us to be able to influence the global climate change discourse through active engagement in various global fora that arise from this international obligation. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Kwanza administration has been very intentional in profiling the country's climate action. And it is because the vagaries of the climate change debacle are borderless. And what Kenya does or does not do affects the global community and vice versa. And that's the reason why we have been very deliberate in our climate diplomacy. As a result of which, Mr. Speaker, Kenya is currently the chair of the African Group of Negotiators, which gives the country an opportunity to shape the discussions on climate change in the continent, and thereafter influencing the same discourse at the global level through the conferences of parties, which happen every year. His Excellency the President is also the coordinator of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, as well as after the hosting of the inaugural Africa Climate Summit last year in September, Kenya is currently the host of the Africa Climate Change Secretariat. And as I say, this really is intended to enhance our resource mobilization capacities, linking the country with the technologies across the globe, as well as the climate financing challenges that we face, that we require the global networking. Mr. Speaker, coming to the specific question by Senator for Kisumu County, which is the focused on the initiatives we have put in, both at national and county level, on climate change needs, taking into account the climate change needs of every county. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fact that the core mandate of the ministry is to provide policy and regulatory environment for adequate implementation of climate action in the country, the ministry has been engaged very vigorously in resource mobilization to address the climate change issues. I will focus on an example of a program called the Financing Locally Led Climate Action, FLOCA, which is a US $295 million program, which is focused on building climate change resilience at the local level. The program is targeting 45 counties, all the counties with the exclusion of Nairobi and Mombasa, and I'm going to explain the reason why. And this program is funded by the World Bank, the governments of Denmark, Germany, Sweden, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Another program is the strengthening forest management for improved biodiversity conservation and climate resilience in the South Rangelands of Kenya, a project funded by the Global Environment Fund, and a list of others. I'm just highlighting the fact that in response to the Senator's question, we have been involved in fundraising efforts, and we have a list of projects that have come through. And Honorable Speaker, any fundraising that we do lands in counties to address the climate change challenges. The ministry, again, through the Development Partner Group, under the Office of the Deputy President, has been championing the alignment of all development partner projects and programs to the government manifesto, as well as ensuring the focus on tangible projects on the ground for us to realize maximum impact. Regarding climate change initiatives that we have put in place, we have a robust legislative and institutional architecture to address climate change and its impacts at both levels of government. Mr. Speaker, sir, at the national level, some of the climate change policies and laws are listed in my presentation, ranging from the Constitution, the Climate Change Response Strategy of 2010, the National Climate Change Action Plan, which is very, very important, Mr. Speaker, the National Climate Change Action Plan. We had one running between 2023 and 2027, 2018, 2022, and we recently came up with the 2023-2027 strategy. And this is as per the Climate Change Act. And this basically is an iterative planning tool for mainstreaming climate actions across all sectors of the economy at both levels of government. It is also an implementing tool for both the nationally determined contributions and, Mr. Speaker, the nationally determined contributions are our national commitments under the UNFCCC on our commitments to reduce emissions and enhance resilience building. We also have the National Adaptation Plan, which runs 2015 to 2030, and the Climate Change Act, which I have spoken to, Mr. Speaker. And just to delve a bit into the Climate Change Act, which is the parent act on climate matters in the country, it provides for and supports mainstreaming of climate change actions into development planning, decision-making, and implementation. Also sets out the principles for climate change planning and implementation. And I wish to highlight some recent amendments that we made to the Climate Change Act, which is last year. And this was intended to provide for regulation of carbon markets and to provide policy direction prescribing carbon reduction with the aim to reduce emissions as per our international and local obligations. Kenya has the largest carbon market portfolio in East Africa, but the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, in terms of tangible impact to the citizens of Kenya, this has been very minimal, and the import of the amendments to the Climate Change Act were actually intended to ensure high integrity carbon markets and a very clear mechanism of benefit sharing between the communities, project proponents, and governments, both national and county. In terms of the progress around the carbon markets space, last week, I think the week before, 18th of June, we have moved to designate the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, as the DNA, which is charged with the responsibility of authorizing and approving participation in the carbon projects under the Paris Agreement. And the reason I delve on this, Mr. Speaker, is because a proper implementation of the carbon markets framework in this country has far-reaching impacts on improvement of the livelihoods of the communities, as well as ensuring that we have sufficient coping mechanisms against climate action. We have listed also the National Climate Change Framework Policy of 2018, the Climate Change Finance Policy of 2018, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan 2019, as some of the legislative frameworks which set the stage for climate action in the country. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the mandate of the ministry is on providing operational coordination on climate change, providing technical backstopping, and requisite climate change policy and legal environment. And in this regard, therefore, the core mandate of the ministry is to offer coordination of various sectors. And we have some sectors identified under the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and those are the energy sector, agriculture sector, water, forestry, industry, transportation, all geared towards the mitigation effects or mitigation action against climate change, and our core mandate, therefore, is to do the coordination of all these entities. Mr. Speaker, we have made progress on enabling actions, and some of them I have already mentioned. Through the implementation of the 2 iterations of the National Climate Change Action Plan, there has been implementation of mitigation and adaptation initiatives across all sectors, some of which include the focus on increasing our tree cover, and this is with the recognition of the importance of prioritizing mitigation actions that have adaptation and sustainable development core benefits. Adoption of clean cooking especially at the local level, to reduce over-reliance by our populations on biomass for domestic cooking and energy needs. And Mr. Speaker, I will be stating that the forestry sector is listed as the topmost cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the country, and thus the focus on restoration of our degraded landscapes, as well as focusing on alternatives to biomass energy to detract attention from the rudimentary focus on firewood for energy needs. And therefore, we are focusing on picking up on technologies across the globe that will give us sustainable options. Adoption of e-mobility, which is key in reducing emissions from burning of fossil fuels, and the government through the line Ministry of Transport, is in the process of finalizing an e-mobility policy to this regard. And I'm glad I saw a motion passed by a member of this House calling for an increased focus on e-mobility options and non-motorized transportation in the country, which is the way to go. The other focus is the increased percentage of electricity generation mix to reduce emissions from the energy sector. Our mix currently stands at 92%, and with the multi-agency coordination through my ministry, the focus is to push this mix to 100% by 2030. Implementation of the National Climate Smart Agriculture is another core focus under the Ministry of Agriculture for purposes of adaptation. Mr. Speaker, I have mentioned the Climate Change Act and the provision for the carbon market regulatory framework, the National Climate Change Resource Center, which we have recently operationalized, and this is a model information and knowledge management center domiciled at our metrology department, and it is a national repository for climate change information and data, which is very, very much, it comes very handy at this time. The long-term low emissions development strategy, we prepared and launched it last year in 2023, which provides guidance to the country on attainment of low emission climate resilient development pathway in the long term. The ministry, through the support of development partners, including the Green Climate Fund, GCF, FLOCA, among others, facilitated the establishment and capacity building of climate change units across the counties and state departments in the country in line with the Climate Change Act of 2016. The ministry has also established climate change environment governance structures at the county level. These are county climate change committees under the respective county climate change acts and county environmental committees under the Environmental Management and Coordination Act. To sum up my response to the first question, Mr. Speaker, we have a law that came into effect in 2016, but little had gone into actualization or implementation, and that has been the focus of the ministry in the past few months. Going